Hey everyone, it's Kenlin, and this is the transmission for The Dark Night of the Soul, Gene Key 36. Now, Gene Key 36 is about turbulence. And turbulence, we can see it as overwhelm, just the barrage of overwhelm from negativity of the news, of other people, of the world scene, all the stuff that's going on that just can overload our nervous system. And where we're going with this gene key is compassion. And you're going to be surprised at some of the nuances of compassion. And we're going to get there through humanity. So this lives in the ring of divinity, which gives us a clue that really this is God, goddess, coming down into form as you. This is the messiness of being human. And the perfection, because God set it up this way. This is how it was meant to be. This is intimacy. You know, have you ever heard that parable that says that oneness can't know itself? So oneness broke itself up into a million trillion gazillion pieces in order to see itself, to know itself. And that oneness is you and me broken into pieces with that rock, with that tree, with that bunny rabbit, with that other person. Everything is one thing. And so Gene Key 36 takes us deeply into the experience of being human. It's messy. It's the stuff that religion, particularly religion, back in the day, tried to go into eternalism. Like everything was about heaven, like avoiding hell, fire and brimstone, and going to heaven, eternalism. Like here and now was shit. So let's wait till we get there. And then even other traditions took that on of ideas of nirvana, of perfection, or enlightenment, even like even non-duality, like this realm doesn't exist. It's all a hologram. It's all an illusion. What exists is the bliss or the no thingness. It's not that those teachings are in and of themselves wrong. There's a truth in them, but over applied by the mind that wants to get out of suffering, then they become distorted. And I know this path very personally, because as I was entering into my life, I had a lot of suffering and I had a lot of heaviness and a lot of emotional baggage weighing me down. I had a lot of karma to move through. I had a lot to clean up. And this gene key, it turns out, is in my Saturn position in my human design. So that will show me that dark nights of the soul are part of how I actualize my life work, which is light. So I'm no stranger to the dark nights of the soul. And in fact, now I understand them in a way that gives me compassion and has me have compassion for others. It actually has activated my compassion. So that's the teaching really of the purpose of the dark night of the soul, is to become fully human, which then becomes fully divine, to feel that God's spark in the darkness. This gate of the I Ching 36 is the darkening of the light. And that might sound bad, but it actually is amazing, because one of the things we have to do for light to be true light is we go and we descend into the shadow. We descend into the darkness. We meet it. And one of the practices we did inside the Sisterhood activation is a Tonglen practice, which I believe feels exactly like the Shakti and energy of Kuan Yin, where she takes in the suffering of the world and through her body, she transmutes it out into light energy. So there is no light without the transmutation of the darkness for the human experience. There might be for the angelic experience to just be in light, but we live in contrast. And so the light, it's a false light if we don't descend into the darkness first. And that teaching, that gnosis, is really coming online for the divine feminine, because that's her province. That's the womb space. That's the place she knows. She knows the fertile void. She knows the dark places. She also, because of her arc lines, we have the nipple to nipple arc line and we have the halo arc line as a woman. We also have like double compassion. So our ability to sense and feel other and hold space for other gives us the spidey senses to really feel the collective and know what is the evolutionary impulse. I love that twist of compassion because it's not just to feel the suffering and transmute it. It's also to feel, where are people at in the collective? Where am I? And then to hold compassion for it, to hold that space that everything is in its right time and place, even as I'm in interruption. So that's the other place of compassion that I want to take us, even when we're in interruption. So I love this story that Richard Rudd told, and I'm going to retell it as a segue into this other side of compassion. And that's the fierce side. So he told the story of the Buddha, a parable. So 3 people have questions for the Buddha. One person comes up to the Buddha and says, Buddha, does God exist? And the Buddha says, no. And that person turns away and is absolutely shattered. And then the second person walks up to Buddha and says, Buddha, does God exist? And the Buddha says, yes. And that person turns away, absolutely shattered. And then the third person comes up to the Buddha and says, Buddha, does God exist? And Buddha says nothing. And that person turns away in this bliss, weeping, absolutely shattered. So breathe into that for a moment. His students come to him and say, Buddha, we noticed that there were 3 people and 3 questions, and you answered differently for each one. Why? And the Buddha said, the first person really believed religion. They really believed in their view of God and the things and the way that they are. And so I had to shatter it so that they could actually see the truth. The second person really believed in his cynicism, in the rejection of the spiritual. And so I had to shatter it so that he could see the truth. And the third person was so close to enlightenment that I gave him a transmission so that he could see the truth. And he was shattered by the truth. So there's a way that compassion transcends the personal. It's transpersonal. We can have sympathy and pity at the personal level, but that is not transformative. That may even also be shadow in some states, in some places, right? Or some ways. We can have pity, which opens our heart, but also we can feel superior. Or we can feel that someone else is less than. But this idea of the highest transpersonal level of compassion is actually not compassionate or pity or full of pity or sympathy for your personal condition. It actually sees you on a higher level. It sees who you really are as the God self, wanting to be actualized through your human self. And so think for yourself, have you had a situation where someone has delivered you a message, maybe a coach, maybe a healer, maybe a therapist, maybe, someone in your life, like your partner, who's given you a message about how you've been being, and it just cut so deeply. I remember my brain guy, was a mentor of mine, and we were working for a year together, and his adjusting my hormones and brain, and he was just super ninja. And he said something to me. My partner at the time was there and witnessed it. And he said something to me that when I got home, I cried for 7 hours. And I had mentioned it to my partner, and he's like, yeah, I was there. Yeah, so what? But it got in, and it got in deep, because he was calling me out on a part of my identity that was wrapped around, I think it was like being a do-gooder or something. I can't even remember. It did its work, and I don't remember anymore. But it was something that really got my identity, because my identity was attached to being a do-gooder, to being seen as being a do-gooder, to, be the one who helps people. And none of that's bad, but there's a shadow in it, right? And that's the thing that we're here to look at. And the shadow being like, I'm superior, or I'm not going to be vulnerable because I'm going to be out there helping you, but I'm not going to let anyone help me. So he just like a knife just went right through the heart of it and touched that wound. And I cried for 7 hours. But what I saw when I came out of that, and the ego wants to contract. Let me just presence that before I talk about coming out of it, because there's a thing like a vulnerability hangover. When someone just saw that ugly part of me, I just wanted to contract. And there was like, my mind was looping. Well, maybe I'll go to a different brain guy. Maybe I'll never talk to him again. Maybe I'm not going to go back. You know how the mind does that. But ultimately I went back, and there was really nothing in the space, because he didn't mean it that way. There was just a phrase that came out of his mouth. And I look at it now as divine, like my soul and his soul contracting for that to get seen on that day. And that was compassion. That's compassion. That's the other side of that more motherly compassion. It's a fierce compassion. He loved, and I knew this at the time. After it happened, I was able to really understand this. He loved me, the real me, the soul me, more than he loved the little me. So he was willing to forsake our friendship or whatever, the little me was going to do. Like, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm never coming back. And maybe, if it was a different space and time in my life, I maybe wouldn't have, either because of shame or because of anger. But he loved me more to risk our relationship, to risk being that guy for me. He loved my soul more to pop that identity that I had around being this person. And, when we pop those identities, and those are dark nights of the soul, we don't have to like do anything. There's no, I didn't get like, oh gosh, I was really like this and now I'm like this. No, it just all happens. It just automatically happens because I visited that territory that I was hiding through my do-gooderism. I was hiding that territory, my vulnerability. I was hiding that I needed support. I was hiding that inferior, superior matrix. And he just tapped into it. And just by me witnessing it, just by me being there, it transmuted it. It alchemized it. And that is the alchemy of Gene Key 36. It brings us home to ourselves. It says, stop trying to be spiritual. Stop trying to be perfect. I'm going to just pause for that, because we are running that. We are all running that. And we're using spirituality. We're using perhaps even practices or sacred texts to try to become perfect so that we don't feel how messy this situation of being human really is. I had the opportunity in my life as well to exercise this level of compassion. And I want to share it only because it's messy. It's not, I didn't all of a sudden turn into a perfect human being without any shadow. I was still with shadow as I pointed someone toward a truth, toward the light. But there was a larger part of me that the come from place was a deeper love. And how do I know that? Because I too would have lost something. I too had to give up something. So when you're willing to give up something and you're willing to die to something, that can give you a signal that there's something greater at work. So just to put it in concrete, I caught someone in a lie. And this person had a pattern of lying in that particular situation, always lying. And that person had professed to me that they were clean of that they don't do that anymore, that they were committed to integrity. And then I found them in a lie. And it was a real time lie. It wasn't past. It was like happening in the moment. So I got them on the phone and I just said, hey, I know, like, it's time to come clean. And here's what you get to do about it. You get to tell this other person, or I'm going to tell the other person that you're lying. And I could feel the fear just rippling through his being. It was like, no, I will not come clean. I will not say that I lied. And here's where I had my choice point. And I wrestled with the choice point. And there's no right or wrong here. I'm not, anyone could be in this situation and decide differently. But in that situation, I contemplated what was right action for me. What was my soul's mandate for me? And I said, you tell this person that you're lying by 5 o'clock, or I will. Hung up the phone. And then I called my friends and I'm like, oh my God, am I really going to do this? And so I had to get really clear, like, what were my motives? And there's all kinds. This person and I had a long history. There's lots of stuff. But there was also a really deep love on a soul level that I was very present to. And I knew that if I carried forward with this, that I would lose the friendship. But I also knew that if this person did it, if they actually came clean with their lie, that it would actually clean up their entire past of all these lies. It would stop the pattern and it would put him on new footing. So I had to choose what was I a stand for? And I ultimately chose I was a stand because I got this gene key in my Saturn position. And I decided that it was mine to do. If he didn't make the choice. And indeed, he did not make the choice. And indeed, I did tell the person. And things went nuclear. And then they smoothed out. And I will report back that over time, because time has a way of smoothing these things out, they're not so turbulent in the moment. And turbulence is also this gene key's shadow, this overwhelm. It's emotional overwhelm. It's programming partner is gene key 6, which is conflict. So it's relationship, emotional conflict. And all of that was present. But over time, and not even a very long time, this person came to deeply appreciate what happened. It indeed did set him on a completely new footing. And that spell of the lie, the curse of that lie, is broken. And so I know I played a karmic, dharmic role because of our sacred contract. And that is the nature of compassion. And I share the story because compassion lives even when there are all these other complexities of being human that live in that story. So it didn't require my perfection. It required me to get clear on where my allegiance really was. And compassion says to you, where is your allegiance? If you're an enabler in a codependent pattern and you're supporting someone else's addiction, is that compassionate? Well, I did help them off the floor. They fell, they were drunk, they were on the floor, and I helped them up. Yes, that may be some level of compassion. And is there, and this is a question, is there a deeper level of compassion that you're being called to? And I can't know that answer for you. Only you can know that answer for you. And we oftentimes grow into that answer, because there was a time in my life during those dark nights of the soul in my early awakening period when I was holding on to everything. I was so scared of letting anything go that I wasn't going to make those bargains of standing for someone's bigness and their soul and their release of old karmic patterns that don't serve them and just hurt themselves and others. I wasn't going to make those bargains. I was going to just try to have the boat not be rocked because there was too much turbulence. So we grow when our sense of security, inner security, grows, meaning we've cleaned out of a lot of our shadow, or enough of our shadow, that we can tolerate the turbulence on the outside. You know, I had a really great Buddhist psychiatrist or psychologist once. His name's Bruce Tift, and he's written books. And he said to me, if you have a lot of complexity on the inside, then you need everything to be pretty simple on the outside. But if you're simple on the inside, then you can handle the turbulence or complexity on the outside. So we can awaken into more of the reality of all of the nuances of humanity, of being human, because inside we're clear and clean. And that's what I would call simple. I would call it clean. And being clean is that thing that happened to me with my brain guy of going into the wound, the deepest wound in that moment. And I didn't even have to name it. It was just, I cried, just washing it and purifying it because I was feeling it and experiencing it. And maybe what bubbled up is if I were to put myself in those shoes, it's like, oh, I really am unworthy. Oh, he found out that I am an imposter. I'm a sham. I'm not really a do-gooder. I'm not even worthy. Even my do-gooding efforts are crap, And so I'm really defective. You know what I mean? Like it can just go there, and touching that wound and crying and crying and crying is like purifying and purifying. And there's just greater and greater and greater capacities. So it becomes cleaner, and then my world can be more complex, and I can handle more. I can see more. I can allow more. And so this is the beauty of aging, really. This is the beauty of aging. Kuan Yin came to Earth, came to our awareness as a mythical energy to those of us on Earth, to alleviate our suffering and our suffering of death, our suffering of illness, and our suffering of aging. Those are all sufferings of the impermanence of life, and those cut deep. As a concept, maybe not, but when your dog dies or your parent dies or your partner dies or your child dies or someone gets sick, or I witness my family aging, I witness my mom aging, I witness me aging, and there's a sadness there, there's a grief there. And Kuan Yin comes in that space and alchemizes it by bringing the light through, allowing us to touch that grief, that inner darkness. Because if we keep it walled away, like that fear of aging, if we keep it walled away, or that fear that our kid might get sick, or that our kid is sick, or that someone may die, who everyone's going to die. If we tell ourselves stories, if we make up that that's just not going to happen to us, or if we take on an addiction, whether it's eating or drinking or exercise or being busy or talking too much, as a way to not feel that looming very close as your breath, grief and fear, then we're missing out on the gift. Because really, when we take that in, the darkening of the light, and we let it go dark, and we make friends with the dark, and we welcome it, we say, hello there, darkness. And we did this inside the sisterhood activation through the practice of Tonglen and a little bit of feeding the demon thrown in there. We alchemize it, and it becomes our ally. And that's how we ascend. That's how we can then breathe out the light. That's how we can be the light. So as you see, this gene key is actually the gene key that can transform a broken down human experience, a human experience full of suffering and pain, and alchemize it into the love that's always there. I'm going to end with this because it reminds me of a share that someone had inside of our sisterhood activation. And in response, I said, you know, in my 30s, I went to India and I saw more of the nature of reality. I saw the suffering of humanity. And India is a beautiful place because it holds the paradox. It's very divine feminine in that it holds the suffering and it holds the love. So when I came home, I was 34 years old. And when I came home, I knew that I was going to work on child sex trafficking. I was a lawyer and I got laid off and I was super happy about that. And I was going to do something of service. And I knew it was going to be working on a cause to fight child sex trafficking. And it was an empowerment program that I found. And so I had read a lot of stories and heard a lot of testimonials of victims. And at the time I was also doing spiritual work. I was just waking up. And I was going into the shadow through the work of Byron Katie and the work. And so I had to ask myself, why are you doing this work? Why are you working with victims of child sex trafficking? Like, that's the worst of the worst. Why are you doing this? And what my soul said was, I want to know if love is real. Because if love doesn't live there, then love isn't real. So that was my inquiry. So I went into those spaces, not even physically all the time, but emotionally and mentally, as I read stories and I did the work and raised money for the nonprofit. I went into the darkness to discover, does love live here? And that brings me to tears. And so I invite you to go on that inquiry for yourself. Go into the darkest places of you and find out what happens. I can tell you, but it would be much better for you to experience. That's what we did today in the sisterhood activation of the membership of the Evolving Sisters Network. And you're welcome to join us and do that with me at any time. And also you're welcome to just do it here and now. To welcome in the very thing that you're trying to push away. To have compassion. And to allow that compassion to alchemize the darkness into light. Until we find that love lives everywhere. In the ring of divinity, we have a very human life. It is meant to be messy. We would be remiss if we would try to move the mess out of the way, because clean up one mess and another mess comes. But there's a way to walk through the earth whole, complete, fully loved, and radiating love in the midst of suffering. Joseph Campbell said, joyfully participate in the sorrows of the world. And this is Gene Key 36. Namaste.